Ethan Cole had always believed that 2 years was enough time to understand any culture. He'd studied Cretan language until his dreams echoed with their melodic speech patterns. He'd learned their customs, their history, their intricate social hierarchies. He'd eaten their food, celebrated their festivals, and earned enough respect to be called friend by people who initially viewed humans as little more than curious animals. But standing in the reception hall of the Grand Citadel, watching Queen Nylara dismiss her entire court with a single elegant gesture of her ringed fingers, Ethan realized he understood nothing at all. The courtiers filed out in perfect synchronization, their elongated ears twitching with barely concealed curiosity. Protocol demanded they obey without question, but Ethan caught the sideways glances, the whispered speculations that would spread through the citadel like wildfire. The human envoy summoned to a private audience with the queen herself. Unprecedented, concerning. The massive doors closed with a sound like a held breath released, and silence descended. Queen Nylara stood before her throne of living crystal, a structure that grew and reshaped itself according to the monarch's emotional state. Right now, sharp edges protruded from its surface like accusations. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature silver from the stress of rule, was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face and the 12 ceremonial rings climbing the length of her pointed ears. Each ring represented a trial overcome, a challenge conquered. She'd earned more rings in 8 years of rule than most monarchs earned in a lifetime. Ethan bowed precisely 15 degrees, the gesture he'd perfected through countless diplomatic functions. Your Majesty, I'm honored by this private summons. I assume you wish to discuss the final terms of the communication treaty before my departure to Earth. Nylara didn't move. Her eyes, the color of aged whiskey, fixed on him with an intensity that made his diplomatic training feel like tissue paper. When she finally spoke, her voice carried that harmonic resonance unique to Cretan females, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his chest. You're not leaving, Ethan Cole. The use of his full name was intentional, formal, distancing. Ethan felt the first stirring of unease in his stomach. Your Majesty, the treaty is finalized. My replacement arrives in 3 weeks. My government expects. Your government's expectations are no longer relevant. She descended the steps from her throne, each footfall precise, controlled. What matters now is containment, damage control, and your presence where I can monitor it. I don't understand. Nylara stopped 3 feet from him, close enough that he could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands that she was fighting to control. Up close she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes that her careful cosmetics couldn't quite conceal, a pallor to her usually rich skin tone. The Festival of Convergence, she said quietly. 4 months ago, you remember. How could he forget? The festival celebrated the rare alignment of Zentara's 3 moons, occurring once every 27 years. The entire planet had erupted in celebration, music that seemed to reshape reality, drinks that tasted of starlight, and an atmosphere of abandoned inhibition that even affected the usually reserved Cretans. And he and Nylara, both carrying the weight of their respective positions, both achingly lonely in ways they'd never admitted, had found themselves on a private balcony overlooking the celebration. They talked for hours, really talked, not as queen and envoy but as 2 people bearing impossible burdens. And when the second moon had reached its apex, casting everything in silver light, they'd kissed. What followed had been passionate, desperate, and something they'd tacitly agreed never to mention again. I remember, Ethan said carefully, but I fail to see. I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a physical force. His mind went blank, then raced through possibilities. A Cretan father, someone else, but why tell him unless? That's impossible, he heard himself say. Humans and Cretans aren't genetically compatible. Every study, every analysis. Every study was wrong. Nylara's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Our physicians confirmed it this morning. The genetic markers are unmistakable, Half Crescent, half human. The child is yours. Ethan's legs suddenly felt unreliable. He looked around for somewhere to sit, found nothing appropriate, and simply stood there trying to process the information. His mind kept circling back to the impossibility of it, as if repetition could make it false. How he managed. Crescent conception is tied to emotional resonance, Nylara said, and he heard the bitterness in her tone directed at herself. He realized, not him. We don't reproduce casually. It requires genuine connection, vulnerability, openness. It's why our birth rates are low, why we treasure each child. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I let my guard down once in 8 years of rule. And the universe apparently has a sense of irony. Nylara, Queen Nylara, she corrected sharply. Or Your Majesty, we are not intimate acquaintances, Ethan Cole. What happened was a mistake, and now that mistake has consequences that could destroy everything I've built. Ethan took a breath, forcing his diplomatic training to assert itself over his shock. Help me understand the political implications. Surely a child, while unexpected. A half-human child. Nylara's ears flattened against her head, a Crescent expression of distress he'd learned to recognize. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 2,000 years. My people believe that purity is what maintains our connection to the harmonic fields that power our technology, our culture, our identity. A hybrid heir threatens everything they understand about themselves. But that's superstition. Your technology is based on quantum mechanics, not bloodlines. You've been here 2 years and you still don't understand. Nylara turned away, moving to a window that overlooked the city below, towers of living metal that sang in the wind, streets that rearranged themselves according to traffic patterns, all of it beautiful and deeply alien. For Crescents, belief and reality are interconnected. If my people believe a hybrid child will weaken the harmonic fields, their collective doubt could actually cause disruption. Perception shapes outcome in ways your human science doesn't account for. Ethan processed this, his mind racing. What about your political position? You're well-respected, your reign has been successful. My brother Vorath has been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Nylara's reflection in the window showed her expression hardening. He's never accepted that our mother chose me as heir over him. He has support among traditionalist factions, military leaders who find my diplomatic approach too soft. If word spreads that I'm carrying a human's child, he'll use it to challenge my fitness for the throne. Can he do that? Legally, he'd need cause. But a queen who has, in his words, contaminated the sacred bloodline with alien genetics. She shook her head. He'll find a way to make it legal, or he'll simply seize power and make legality irrelevant afterward. The weight of the situation settled over Ethan like a physical pressure. This wasn't just about an unexpected pregnancy. This was about empires, about the fragile peace between humanity and the Crescent people, about everything he'd worked to build for 2 years potentially collapsing because of one night when they'd both been foolish enough to be human. Or Crescent or both. I should contact Earth, he said. My government needs to know. No. Nylara spun around, and for the first time he saw fear beneath her anger. If Earth learns before I can control this situation, they'll recall you immediately. Your media will sensationalize it. The story will spread before I can prepare my people. It will look like you seduced me for political advantage, or that I'm a weak ruler who couldn't resist an alien's advances. Either interpretation damages both our peoples. So what do you propose? I just disappear. You're experiencing a health issue that requires extended treatment in our medical facilities. That's the official story. Your government will be informed that you've requested to extend your posting. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, I'll have found a solution. And what solution would that be? Nylara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know yet. But I know I can't think clearly with you out there, potentially exposing everything. So you'll stay here, in the Eastern Tower, comfortable but contained. and you'll help me figure out how to survive this catastrophe you've helped create." But Ethan wanted to argue. He wanted to point out that it took two people to create a child, that she'd been just as willing as he had that night, that this mess was equally their responsibility. But looking at her, exhausted, frightened, carrying both an impossible child and the weight of an empire, he found he couldn't summon the indignation. "I have conditions," he said instead. Her eyebrows rose. "You're not in a position to make demands." "I'm in exactly that position. You need my cooperation for your health issue story to be believable. You need me to not find a way to contact Earth. And you need me to not cause problems while you figure out your solution." He stepped closer, meeting her eyes directly. "So yes, I have conditions." Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps a hint of respect for his boldness. "Name them." "I want access to information. I want to understand what's happening politically and medically. If this is my child too, I have a right to know." "Reasonable, what else?" "I want to be part of whatever solution you devise. Not just informed, but involved. This affects my people as much as yours." Nylara studied him for a long moment, her ears making small movements he'd learned indicated deep thought. "Anything else?" "Yes," Ethan took a breath. "I want you to stop treating me like this is entirely my fault. I didn't seduce you, I didn't take advantage, and I certainly didn't plan this. We were two lonely people who found comfort in each other. If that makes us fools, then we're fools together." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Nylara nodded once sharply. "Agreed. Silas will be your handler. He's loyal and discreet. He'll see to your needs and ensure you have the access you've requested." She moved back toward her throne, and he recognized the dismissal. "Your quarters are being prepared in the Eastern Tower. They're comfortable, luxurious even. But make no mistake, Ethan Cole, you are not a guest. You are a complication I'm containing until I determine how to resolve you." "And the child, how do you plan to resolve the child?" Nylara's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, the first maternal gesture he'd seen from her. The movement seemed to surprise her, and she quickly dropped her hand. "I don't know," she admitted, and for just a moment the queen disappeared and he saw only a frightened woman facing an impossible situation. "I truly don't know." Ethan was escorted to his new quarters by guards who remained professionally silent throughout the journey. The Eastern Tower was indeed luxurious, rooms appointed with Crescent technology that responded to his presence, windows that could display any vista in the Empire or show the actual view of the city below, furniture that adjusted to his human proportions automatically. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Through the window, he watched a transport ship lift off from the spaceport, its trajectory taking it toward the orbital station where ships departed for Earth. In 3 weeks, his replacement would arrive on one of those ships, expecting to find him ready for turnover. Instead, they'd find excuses, delays, and eventually lies. His career was effectively over. His relationship with Earth, with everything he'd known, now filtered through the decisions of an alien queen. And somewhere in her royal chambers, a child that shouldn't exist was growing. Half of him, half of her, entirely impossible. Ethan sank into a chair that immediately molded itself to support him, and wondered how his mission to build bridges between worlds had resulted in building the most complicated bridge imaginable. His communicator, the one they'd allowed him to keep for internal Citadel use only, chimed. A message from Queen Nylara, text only. "The physicians say stress is dangerous for Crescent pregnancies. Try not to add to mine." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. Almost. He typed back, "I'll do my best, Your Majesty, but I make no promises about not asking difficult questions." The response came quickly. "I expected nothing less. That's what makes you dangerous." Ethan set the communicator down and stared at the alien sky, 3 moons rising in sequence like a cosmic countdown to chaos. He had a feeling the difficult questions were only beginning. 3 weeks of comfortable imprisonment had taught Ethan several things about Cretan culture that no diplomatic briefing had covered. He learned that their living metal architecture sang different harmonies depending on the time of day. He learned that their food, which tasted vaguely of emotions rather than flavors, could be adjusted to suit human palates if you knew the right biochemical requests. And he learned that Silas, his assigned handler, had a talent for delivering devastating news with the casual air of someone discussing weather patterns. "The Queen is experiencing complications," Silas announced one morning, sweeping into Ethan's quarters without bothering to announce himself. His ears, adorned with small silver studs that marked him as part of the intelligence division, twitched with what might have been concern. "The neurological bond is destabilizing. She's requested your presence." Ethan looked up from the historical texts he'd been studying, trying to understand Cretan succession law in case it became relevant. What kind of complications? "The bond between mother and child creates a harmonic resonance that stabilizes fetal development. But because the child is half-human, the resonance keeps shifting between Cretan and human neurological patterns. It's causing her significant pain, and the physicians are concerned about long-term effects on both mother and child." The clinical description did nothing to ease the sudden knot of worry in Ethan's stomach. "What can I do about it?" Silas's expression remained carefully neutral, though his ears did that skeptical twitch Ethan had learned to recognize. "The theory is that your presence might stabilize the child's human aspects, creating a bridge between the two patterns. Essentially, the child needs to sense both parents to settle into a consistent harmonic." "Theory," Ethan repeated, "not proven." "Nothing about your situation is proven. You're the first human to impregnate a Cretan queen through genuine emotional connection. Congratulations on your unprecedented achievement." Silas's tone was so dry it could have preserved meat. "Now, shall we go, or would you prefer to analyze the theory to death while the queen suffers?" Ethan was already moving toward the door. The walk to the Queen's private chambers took them through sections of the citadel Ethan hadn't seen before. They passed the Chamber of Memories, where crystallized experiences were stored and could be relived. They walked through the Garden of Equations, where plants grew according to mathematical principles and produced flowers that solved problems when their petals were arranged correctly. Cretan technology never ceased to amaze him. It treated the boundaries between science and nature, between logic and intuition, as suggestions rather than rules. Queen Nylara's chambers were surprisingly modest for a monarch. The rooms were functional rather than ostentatious, though the technology was clearly cutting-edge. She sat in a chair that was monitoring her vital signs, displaying holographic readouts that meant nothing to Ethan but seemed to trouble Silas based on his ear movements. She looked terrible. The pallor he'd noticed 3 weeks ago had worsened, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of neglect. Her hair was loose, falling past her shoulders in uncombed waves. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and there was a tension in her posture that suggested constant pain being endured rather than expressed. "You look awful," Ethan said before he could stop himself. Nylara's laugh was short and humorless. "Your diplomatic skills are as sharp as ever. I thought we agreed I wouldn't add to your stress. Then perhaps try not to insult my appearance in the first minute of arriving." But there was no real anger in her voice, just exhaustion. She gestured to a chair that had been positioned near hers. "Sit. The physicians want to see if proximity helps." Ethan sat, acutely aware of the monitoring equipment now scanning him as well. "How does this work exactly?" "The child is forming neural pathways that incorporate both Cretan and human patterns. But without exposure to human neurological frequencies, it keeps defaulting to Cretan patterns alone, which aren't compatible with its hybrid structure. The result is..." She paused, pressing a hand to her temple. "Painful. Like a signal trying to tune itself to a frequency that doesn't quite exist. And my being here helps. In theory. The physicians believe that if the child can sense both parents' neurological patterns, it will develop a hybrid baseline rather than trying to be purely one or the other. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes. Ethan watched the holographic displays, trying to make sense of the shifting patterns. Gradually, something changed. The erratic fluctuations began to smooth out, finding a rhythm that seemed more stable. "It's working," Silas said quietly from where he observed near the door. "Her pain indicators are dropping." Nylara's shoulders relaxed incrementally and some color returned to her face. "I feel it too. The child is settling." "What does it feel like?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "The bond." Nylara was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "It's like having another consciousness just at the edge of perception. Not thoughts exactly, but impressions, emotions, and since the child is half you, sometimes I get." She stopped, looking uncomfortable. "What?" "Impressions that aren't crescent, feelings that are more linear, more direct. Very human emotions bleeding through from the child, which got them from you, apparently. Your frustration at being confined, for instance. Your worry about Earth. Your tendency to solve problems through analysis rather than intuition. You can feel all that." "Not clearly, more like echoes. It's disconcerting." She met his eyes, and before you ask, "No, I can't control it." The bond formed automatically with conception. "I can't sever it, can't modify it, can't even reduce its intensity. So if you're planning anything that involves hiding your emotional state from me, abandon that plan now." Ethan absorbed this. "So you've been feeling my emotional state for 3 weeks." "Yes, your persistent anxiety is exhausting if you must know, though I understand its source." She leaned back in her chair, and some of the regal tension drained from her posture. She looked younger when she wasn't actively projecting authority. "The physicians want us to spend time together regularly, daily sessions of at least an hour until the child's neural patterns stabilize." "I'm hardly complaining about leaving my gilded prison. It's not a prison. I can't leave, can't contact my people, can't make any decisions about my own future. Semantics aside, that's imprisonment." Nylara's ears flattened slightly, that distress signal again. "You're right. I apologize. In trying to protect my empire, I've treated you as a problem to be contained rather than a person affected by circumstances beyond both our control." The apology surprised him. He'd prepared for many things from the Queen, commands, explanations, even threats, but not genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that," he said carefully. "I understand your position is impossible. You're protecting more than just yourself. I'm protecting 17 star systems worth of people who depend on stable leadership. One scandal, one sign of weakness, and Vorath will have the opening he needs." She stood, moving to a window that overlooked the city. "He's been positioning himself for months, meeting with military commanders, courting traditionalist religious leaders, making promises to the outer territories that I can't match without compromising the empire's unity." "What kind of promises?" "Autonomy, reduced taxation, freedom to pursue isolationist policies that would weaken our collective defense, short-term popularity purchases that would cost us long-term stability." She turned back to him. "Your presence here isn't widely known yet, but that will change. He'll find out eventually, and when he does, he'll use it." Ethan joined her at the window, maintaining respectful distance. "What if you got ahead of him? Controlled the narrative before he could twist it? And say what? That I'm carrying a human's child, that the Queen who represents pure Crescent leadership has hybridized the royal bloodline." She shook her head. "There's no narrative that makes this palatable to the traditionalists." "What about the progressives? You must have supporters who believe in change, in evolution of traditions." "Some, not enough to counter Vorath's coalition." She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about Earth's political systems. How do your leaders maintain power when faced with scandal?" Ethan considered the question. "They either deny, redirect, or embrace. Denial rarely works long-term. Redirection can buy time, but usually the truth surfaces. Embracing, owning the situation and reframing it is risky but often most effective. Reframe a pregnancy that violates 2,000 years of tradition. Frame it as the beginning of a new tradition, evolution rather than contamination. He turned to face her directly. Your people value harmonic resonance, right? The ability of different frequencies to create something stronger together than apart. Yes. Then present the child as exactly that. Two different species creating a harmonic that neither could achieve alone. Not dilution of the bloodline, but enhancement of it. Nylara stared at him, her ears doing complicated movements he couldn't quite interpret. That's not entirely without merit, but it would require proof, evidence that the child represents something beneficial, not detrimental. Then we gather evidence. Your physicians are studying this pregnancy. Have them document everything. Neural patterns, genetic advantages, any indication that the hybrid aspects are strengths rather than weaknesses. And if they find the opposite, if the evidence shows that the child is compromised, weakened, a cautionary tale rather than a success story. Ethan met her eyes steadily. Then we face that together too, but we won't know until we look. Something shifted in Nylara's expression, the first crack in the wall of isolation she'd built around herself. You keep saying we, as if we're partners in this. Aren't we? Like it or not, Your Majesty, our fates are thoroughly intertwined now. I'm not just the inconvenient human who complicated your reign. I'm the father of your child, the witness to your struggle, and currently your only ally who has absolutely no political agenda beyond survival. You have no agenda because you have no power, which makes me trustworthy in a way that no one else in your circle can be. Everyone else wants something from you. I just want to understand what's happening and help find a solution that doesn't destroy both our peoples. Nylara was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those whiskey-colored eyes that missed nothing. Finally, she nodded once. All right, Ethan Cole, we'll try this partnership of necessity. I'll share information with you fully, involve you in planning, treat you as an ally rather than a complication. She moved back to her monitoring chair, settling into it with a weariness that spoke of chronic pain. But understand this. My first priority is and will always be my people. If it comes to a choice between your comfort and their stability, I will choose them every time. I wouldn't expect anything less from a good queen. The compliment seemed to catch her off guard. Her ears did that flutter-witch again, and for just a moment her expression softened. The physicians want to try something, she said, changing the subject with obvious deliberateness. They believe that shared experiences might further stabilize the child's neural patterns, memories of both parents, cultural touchstones from both species. Would you be willing to share some of your memories of Earth? Through our harmonic technology. You can do that, transfer memories. Not transfer, share. You would experience them while our equipment records the emotional and neural patterns. The child could then be exposed to those patterns, giving it access to its human heritage. Ethan considered this. Opening his memories to alien technology, allowing his most personal experiences to be recorded and studied, felt invasive. But if it helped the child, what kind of memories would be most useful? Formative ones. Your childhood, family experiences, things that shaped your understanding of human culture and connection. The more emotionally significant, the more useful for neural pattern establishment. Ethan thought of his mother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking. His father teaching him to fish, patient explanations about persistence and timing. His sister's laughter, high and pure, when he'd chase her through their backyard on summer evenings. Those memories were private, precious, the foundation of who he was as a person. All right, he said, I'll do it. Nylara's expression showed surprise, then gratitude. Thank you. I know it's not a small thing I'm asking. It's not small at all, but that child deserves to know both parts of itself. Even if it's growing in a Cretan womb surrounded by Cretan culture, it's also half human, Half of me. It should know what that means. Silas had been so quiet Ethan had almost forgotten he was there. Now he spoke up. I'll arrange the memory session with the physicians. We should do it soon. The earlier the child is exposed to stabilizing patterns, the better. He left to make arrangements, and Ethan and Nalara sat in companionable silence. The tension that had characterized their earlier interactions had shifted into something more sustainable, not friendship exactly, but mutual respect tempered by shared crisis. I have a confession, Nalara said suddenly. Oh. I read your personal files. Not just your diplomatic reports, but your psychological evaluation, your family background, your career trajectory. Everything Earth sent when they proposed you as envoy. Ethan should have felt violated, but mostly he felt curious. And what did you learn? That you became an envoy because your sister died in the first contact incident. The miscommunication that resulted in 12 humans dying, including her. You dedicated your career to ensuring it never happened again. Nalara's voice was soft. I didn't know that when we talked at the festival. When you spoke about understanding between species being worth any personal cost, you meant that literally. Ethan's throat tightened. She believed in it too, that if we could just communicate properly, share experiences, find common ground. She died because both species assumed understanding rather than working for it. And now you're working for it in the most fundamental way possible, creating a being that is both species, that might bridge the gap she died trying to cross. That's a generous interpretation of how I accidentally got you pregnant. Nalara actually smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look younger, less burdened. Perhaps, but I'm trying to find meaning in this chaos. It helps. Ethan returned the smile. Then let's find meaning together, and maybe, if we're very lucky, that child will be the bridge my sister wanted to be, something good born from both our sacrifices. That's very optimistic for someone imprisoned by an alien queen. I prefer to think of it as aggressively hopeful. It's a human trait, one I'm beginning to appreciate. Their conversation was interrupted by Silas returning with news that would shatter their fragile peace. His ears were flat against his head, his expression grave. Your Majesty, Prince Voreth has formally invoked the right of genetic purity challenge. He's demanding you submit to examination within 3 days. If you refuse, he claims right of emergency succession. Nalara went pale. He can't. That right hasn't been invoked in centuries. He's found enough council members to validate it. 3 days, Your Majesty. Either you submit to examination, which will reveal the pregnancy, or you refuse, and he uses your refusal as evidence that you're hiding genetic contamination. Ethan watched as the Queen's expression cycled through shock, fear, and finally settled on cold fury. Then we have 3 days to make that examination irrelevant, she said. 3 days to find evidence of his treachery that makes any challenge he raises illegitimate. She turned to Ethan, and her eyes held something he hadn't seen before, hope mixed with desperation. You wanted partnership. Now's your chance to prove humans are worth the complication. Ethan stood, feeling the weight of 2 civilizations' futures settling on his shoulders. Then, let's get to work. Investigating a prince's conspiracy from within his sister's citadel was exactly as suicidal as Ethan had imagined. He and Silas spent the first night poring over information networks, searching for patterns in Voreth's activities, his meetings, his communications, his financial transactions. Crescent information systems were both more advanced and more restrictive than anything on Earth. Everything was recorded in harmonic patterns that required specific biometric access to decode. Fortunately, Silas's position in intelligence gave him clearances that would have been impossible to obtain otherwise. Here, Silas said, pointing to a cluster of data points on the holographic display. Voreth met with Governor Thax from the Outer Territories 6 times in the past 2 months. That's unusual. The outer territories have been loyal to the Queen's faction since she reduced their military obligations 5 years ago. Unless Voreth promised them something better, Ethan mused, studying the pattern. What could he offer that Nalara can't? Independence, likely. The outer territories have always chafed under central control. They're loyal because Nalara treats them well, but if Voreth promised full autonomy, they'd switch allegiances. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to think like both a Crescent political operative and a human strategist. But that's just meetings. We need evidence of actual conspiracy, something that proves he's planning a coup rather than just building political support. Silas's ears twitched thoughtfully. Voreth keeps his most sensitive communications in his personal chambers. Encrypted, naturally, but the encryption key would be in his neural implant. If someone could access his private terminal while he's away. Someone like me? Ethan asked flatly. You're human. Your neural patterns don't register on our security systems the same way Crescent ones do. You'd have a better chance of avoiding detection. Silas met his eyes. But if you're caught, the Queen would have to disavow knowledge of your actions. You'd be executed for espionage. What a cheerful option. Would you prefer we let Voreth's challenge stand? Let him force the Queen into revealing the pregnancy on his terms, painting it as evidence of her unfitness to rule. Ethan thought of Nalara, exhausted, frightened, carrying their impossible child while trying to hold an empire together. Thought of the child itself, innocent of the politics surrounding its existence. Thought of his sister, who died believing in bridges between species. Tell me everything I need to know about Crescent security systems. The infiltration happened 2 nights later, when Voreth was attending a military function in the Northern Territories. Ethan moved through corridors designed for Crescent hearing, acutely aware that his human footsteps were louder, his breathing harsher. Silas had provided him with a dampening device that masked the worst of it, but he still felt exposed, vulnerable. Voreth's chambers were in the Western Tower, as far from the Queen's quarters as possible, apparently a deliberate choice on his part. The rooms were decorated in martial style, with displays of weapons and tactical honors. The private terminal was easy enough to locate, a sophisticated holographic interface that responded to Ethan's biometrics after he applied the override code Silas had provided. The encryption was formidable, but Silas had prepared him for that too. He inserted a device that would copy all encrypted files without needing to decrypt them first. Silas's team could handle that later. The process took 7 agonizing minutes, during which every sound seemed amplified to thunderous proportions. He was nearly done when the door opened. Ethan spun to find Prince Voreth standing in the entrance, his expression cycling through surprise, anger, and finally settling on cold satisfaction. He was tall even for a Crescent, with close-cropped dark hair and ears adorned with military service markers. His eyes, a shade darker than Nalara's, were sharp with intelligence. The human envoy, Voreth said, stepping into the room. In my private chambers, accessing my personal terminal, my sister must be truly desperate to send you on such a foolish mission. Ethan's mind raced through options. Denial was pointless. He was caught red-handed. Attack was suicide. Voreth was larger and undoubtedly trained in combat, so he defaulted to diplomacy. I'm gathering evidence of treason, he said evenly. Your conspiracy with the outer territories, your plans to use the genetic purity challenge as a pretense for coup. Voreth's smile was predatory. You assume there's evidence to find, and even if there were, you assume anyone would believe a human over a prince of the royal blood. He moved closer, and Ethan fought the urge to step back. Tell me, human, does my sister know about this mission? Or are you acting independently, thinking to win her favor through misguided heroics? She knows. Then she's more foolish than I thought. Sending an alien to gather evidence that no Crescent court would accept. Voreth's ears twitched with amusement. Although I suppose foolishness runs in her nature. After all, she let you seduce her, didn't she? let you contaminate the royal bloodline with your inferior genetics. Ethan's blood ran cold. You know about the pregnancy? Of course I know. I have allies in the palace, including among the physicians, a half-human child in the queen's womb. The scandal alone would be enough to destroy her, but she's also been hiding it, lying to her people. When I reveal the truth at the examination, she'll be ruined. Vorath leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. And you'll be executed as the alien who corrupted a queen. Your people will face severe diplomatic consequences. Both species will suffer because you couldn't control your inferior human urges. The only inferior thing I see is a prince who would destroy his own empire for personal ambition, Ethan said quietly. Vorath's hand shot out, gripping Ethan's throat with surprising strength. You dare. I dare speak truth. Your sister has ruled wisely for 8 years. She's maintained peace, strengthened alliances, improved conditions for all territories. You've done nothing but plot and scheme from the shadows like a coward. The grip tightened, cutting off his air. Vorath's eyes were blazing with fury. I should kill you now. End this before it becomes more complicated. Then you'd have to explain a dead human diplomat, Ethan managed to gasp out. Questions would be asked. Your conspiracy would unravel under scrutiny. For a long moment, Vorath held him there, and Ethan genuinely thought he was about to die. Then the prince released him, stepping back with visible effort to control his rage. You're not worth the complications your death would cause, not yet. Vorath straightened his robes, his composure reasserting itself. Get out. Take whatever data you've stolen, it won't help you. When the examination comes, my sister will be exposed, and all your machinations will count for nothing. Ethan retrieved the data device, his throat aching where Vorath had gripped it. He moved toward the door, but Vorath's voice stopped him. Human, one more thing. Your people have a saying about bridges, don't they? About building connections between opposing sides. Vorath smiled coldly. In my experience, bridges burn quite effectively when set aflame. Remember that. Ethan left with the prince's threat echoing in his mind. When he returned to Nalara's chambers, bruises already forming on his throat, Silas immediately took the data device to begin decryption. Nalara herself took one look at Ethan's injuries and her expression hardened with cold fury. He found you, she said, not a question. He knows about the pregnancy, has known for weeks. He's planning to reveal it during the examination, frame you as an unfit ruler who was corrupted by an alien. Nalara was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she nodded once decisively. Then we beat him to it. We announced the pregnancy ourselves, on our terms, with evidence of his conspiracy. We frame him as a traitor who tried to exploit a natural biological event for personal gain. Will the evidence be enough? He threatened that it wouldn't matter, that no Crescent court would believe a human's testimony. Then we don't rely on human testimony alone. Nalara began pacing, her mind clearly working through possibilities. We present Crescent evidence, analyzed by Crescent intelligence, supported by Crescent allies. You are merely the instrument of gathering. The conclusions come from our own people. Do you have enough allies for that? I have some. Counselor Marin has always been suspicious of Vorath. General Vessa owes me a favor for sparing her son from military tribunal 3 years ago, and the religious leader. Then you should probably prepare your people for war, and I should prepare mine for civil conflict. She met his eyes. No pressure. Ethan wanted to make a joke, wanted to use humor to diffuse the tension, as he usually did. But some moments were too serious even for gallows humor. We won't lose, he said instead. We can't afford to. No, Nalara agreed. We really can't. That night, they worked together to prepare the presentation, combining evidence, crafting arguments, planning how to frame everything in ways that might sway enough faction leaders to their side. They worked until exhaustion claimed them both, and Ethan fell asleep in a chair in her chambers, too tired to make it back to his tower. He woke hours later to find Nalara standing at the window, watching the sunrise paint the living metal towers in shades of gold and rose. "I'm afraid," she admitted without turning around. Ethan rose, joints protesting from sleeping in the chair, and joined her at the window. "I am too." "Good, fear keeps you sharp." She turned to face him, and in the morning light, with her hair loose and her face free of royal composure, she looked almost vulnerable. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know something. The night of the Festival of Convergence, when we created this complication, I don't regret it." "You don't?" "I regret the circumstances, the timing, the political disaster it's created. But the connection itself, the feeling of being understood, even briefly, by someone who saw me as a person rather than a symbol." She shook her head. "I haven't felt that in 30 years, not since my mother died." Ethan reached out and took her hand. Her fingers, longer than human fingers, with extra joints that allowed remarkable dexterity, interlaced with his. "Then let's make sure this child grows up in a galaxy where that kind of connection is celebrated, not condemned." Very poetic. "I'm learning from the best." Nylara squeezed his hand once, then released it, her royal composure reasserting itself. "Time to dress for battle, human. Today we either save both our peoples or destroy them." "No pressure," Ethan repeated her words from the night before. She actually smiled. "None at all." The great assembly hall had been designed to intimidate. Its ceiling arched impossibly high, supported by pillars of living metal that sang different notes as air currents moved past them, creating a constant background harmony that emphasized the gravity of any proceedings held within. Tiered seating rose on all sides, arranged so that every representative could see the central speaking platform clearly. This was where Crescent history had been shaped for 2 millennia, treaties signed, wars declared, monarchs crowned and deposed. Today, it might be where interstellar history changed forever. Ethan stood just off the main platform, watching as representatives from across the Crescent Empire filed into their designated seats. He recognized military commanders by their weapons of rank, religious leaders by their elaborate ear adornments, territorial governors by their regional colors. Prince Voreth sat prominently in the royal family section, his expression smugly confident. He believed he'd already won. Queen Nylara entered last, as tradition demanded. She wore full ceremonial regalia, robes of state that shimmered with captured starlight, a crown of living crystal that resonated with her neural patterns, and all 12 of her earned rings displayed prominently on her ears. She looked every inch the ruler, power and authority radiating from her presence. At her gesture, Ethan joined her on the platform. The murmurs that swept through the assembly were immediate and shocked. A human on the royal speaking platform was unprecedented. Several representatives actually rose from their seats in protest before protocol forced them back down. Voreth was the first to speak, his voice carrying harmonic overtones of outrage. "Sister, what is the meaning of this? You bring an alien into our most sacred chamber." "I bring an envoy of the human people into a discussion that directly concerns humanity," Nylara responded, her voice steady and clear. "Given what I'm about to reveal, his presence is not only appropriate but necessary." Before Voreth could respond, Nylara activated the chamber's holographic systems. Data began projecting around the room, financial records, communication logs, meeting schedules. All of it carefully organized and clearly presented. "Representatives, I have called this emergency assembly to address 3 matters of critical importance. First, evidence of conspiracy within the royal family. Second, unprecedented developments in Crescent human relations. And third, the future of our empire in an evolving galaxy." Voreth stood, his expression shifting from smugness to concern. "This is highly irregular. The genetic purity challenge I've invoked takes precedence over." "The genetic purity challenge," Nylara interrupted, "which I will address in full. But first, the assembly must understand the context in which that challenge was made." She gestured, and the holographic display focused on specific documents. These are communications between Prince Voreth and separatist elements in the outer territories. They detail plans to use any perceived weakness in my rule to trigger secession. In exchange for his support of their independence, they've promised military backing for his claim to the throne. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Voreth's face went pale, then flushed with rage. Fabrication. You've had your human spy manufacture evidence to discredit me. The evidence was gathered through our own intelligence networks. Silas stepped forward from the shadows, his intelligence division credentials clearly displayed. I personally supervised the decryption and analysis. These are genuine communications, verified by harmonic signature authentication. Lies. Voreth was on his feet now, his composure shattered. She's using this alien's influence to corrupt our systems, to twist reality to serve her purposes. Then let us see what other corruption I've allowed, Nylara said quietly. She took a deep breath, and Ethan saw the moment when she steeled herself for what came next. Representatives, there is a reason my brother chose this particular moment to invoke the genetic purity challenge. It wasn't from respect for tradition. It was because he'd learned a secret he planned to use against me. She placed her hand over her abdomen, the gesture deliberate and unmistakable. I am carrying a child. The father is Ethan Cole, human envoy. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted, some in outrage, others in shock, a few in what might have been excitement. The harmonic background of the hall shifted into discordant notes as the collective emotional state of the assembly destabilized the living metal. Military commanders conferred urgently. Religious leaders clutched their sacred texts. Voreth's voice cut through the noise, triumphant despite the earlier accusations. You see, she admits it, contamination of the royal bloodline, exactly as I feared. This is why the genetic purity challenge was necessary. She has made herself unfit to rule. I have made myself a bridge between species, Nylara countered, her voice carrying over the chaos with the authority of her position. And before you judge that bridge as weakness, let me show you what it truly represents. She activated a new holographic display, medical data, neural pattern analyses, genetic comparisons. This child is developing in ways that exceed both Crescian and human normal parameters. Neural connectivity that surpasses our highest recorded levels. Harmonic resonance capabilities that our physicians describe as unprecedented. This is not contamination. This is evolution. Counselor Marin rose from his seat, his expression thoughtful rather than outraged. Your Majesty, these medical claims are extraordinary. Can they be verified? Every physician who has examined me will testify to these findings. The child represents a hybrid vigor that neither species achieves alone, and more than that. She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention. Ancient texts speak of a time when the Crescian harmonic would merge with others to create something stronger. Elder Cassis, you've studied these prophecies. What do they say about the convergence child? An elderly Crescian with ears bearing countless wisdom markers stood slowly. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries of scholarship. The old texts, those written before the isolation period, do speak of a time when a child of two harmonics would bridge the frequencies of the universe. Most scholars dismissed these as mythology, but he looked at the medical data still displaying. What I see here aligns remarkably well with those ancient descriptions. Convenient interpretation, Voreth spat. She's twisting scripture to justify her transgression. And you're twisting tradition to justify your treason, Nylara shot back. Representatives, my brother's challenge isn't about genetic purity, it's about power. These communications prove he planned to use any excuse to destabilize my rule, trigger conflict, and seize the throne. That I happen to provide him with a particularly sensational excuse doesn't change his treasonous intent. General Vessa stood, her military decorations glinting in the holographic light. I've reviewed the evidence of conspiracy. If authentic, it's damning. but it doesn't address the fundamental question. Is a monarch who carries a hybrid child fit to rule? Ethan stepped forward then. He felt every eye in the chamber focus on him, the alien, the outsider, the contaminator, but he'd been silent long enough. If I may address the assembly. The request was so unprecedented that silence fell from sheer shock. Nylara nodded permission, and Ethan took a breath before speaking. I'm not a politician. I'm not a warrior or a religious scholar. I'm a diplomat who spent 2 years trying to build understanding between our peoples. I've learned your language, studied your customs, and come to respect your culture deeply. He looked around the chamber, meeting eyes that ranged from hostile to curious. What I see here today is fear. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear that something different must be something inferior. I understand that fear. Humans have it too. He paused, gathering his thoughts. On Earth, there's a concept called hybrid vigor. When 2 different genetic lines combine, the offspring is often stronger, more adaptable, more resilient. Your scientists call it the same thing, hybrid vigor. Your ancient texts call it harmonic convergence. Whatever name you give it, the principle is the same. Diversity creates strength. Pretty words from the alien who violated our queen, someone shouted from the upper tiers. I violated no one, Ethan said firmly. What happened between Queen Nylara and myself was consensual, private, and unexpected in its consequences. But I refuse to apologize for a genuine connection between 2 people who found common ground. If that connection creates a child who bridges 2 species, who represents the possibility of understanding between humanity and Cretans, then I call that something to celebrate, not condemn. He turned to address Vorath directly. You call human genetics inferior, but what have humans achieved in the short time we've been a spacefaring species? We've colonized dozens of worlds, developed technologies you found valuable enough to trade for, and established peaceful relations with multiple alien species. We've done this despite our genetic diversity, or perhaps because of it. The strength of humanity comes from our willingness to embrace difference, to see variety as asset rather than weakness. Humans also have wars, conflicts, endless violence, Vorath countered. Yes, we do. We're imperfect. But so are Cretans. Your isolation periods, your purity laws, your rigid hierarchies, they've preserved your culture, but they've also limited your growth. This child, this impossible hybrid that shouldn't exist according to both our scientists, represents the opportunity to take the best of both our species and create something new. Elder Cassis spoke again, his voice thoughtful. The human makes interesting points. Our traditions have protected us, but they've also constrained us. Perhaps this is the universe telling us that the time for rigid boundaries has passed. Or perhaps it's an alien manipulating us into weakening ourselves, Vorath argued, but Ethan could hear the desperation in his voice. The evidence of his conspiracy was damning, and his attempts to redirect attention to the pregnancy were becoming increasingly transparent. Queen Nylara stepped forward again, and the chamber quieted. I call for a vote, not on my fitness to rule. That will be determined by the success or failure of my continued reign. I call for a vote on 2 matters. The recognition of Prince Vorath's conspiracy and appropriate response to it, and the official acknowledgement of my pregnancy with establishment of a joint Cretan-Human commission to study the implications and prepare both our peoples for this new reality. The voting process in Cretan assemblies was intricate, involving harmonic signatures that couldn't be falsified or hidden. Each representative cast their vote through their neural implant, the results visible in real time as patterns of light that coalesced above the chamber. The conspiracy vote came first, and it wasn't close. The evidence was too clear, Vorath's denials too desperate. He was stripped of his royal status by a margin of 73%, with orders for immediate exile. As guards moved to escort him from the chamber, he locked eyes with Ethan. "This isn't over, human," he said quietly. "You've won a battle, but you've started a war. My supporters won't forget this, and your precious hybrid child will always be seen as contamination by enough people to make its life difficult. Then we'll spend our lives proving them wrong, Ethan replied. Seems like a worthy cause. Vorath was led away, and attention turned to the second vote, the pregnancy recognition. This vote was closer. Traditionalists struggled with the concept, even with Elder Cassis's scriptural interpretations. Military leaders worried about the implications for alliance politics. Territorial governors calculated the effects on their regions. But when the harmonic signatures coalesced, the result was clear: 58% in favor. Not overwhelming, but enough. The pregnancy was officially recognized. The child declared legitimate heir to the throne with formal ties to humanity, and a joint commission was established to manage the unprecedented situation. As the assembly concluded and representatives filed out, some supportive, some troubled, all contemplative, Nylara finally allowed her composed facade to crack. She sagged slightly, exhaustion and relief warring in her expression. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it," Ethan corrected. "I just provided supporting testimony." "You did far more than that. You showed them that humans could respect our traditions while challenging our limitations. You showed them that connection between our species doesn't have to mean contamination." They left the chamber together, Scylla's following discreetly behind. The walk back to Nylara's quarters was quiet, both of them processing what had just occurred. Once in the privacy of her chambers, Nylara finally collapsed into a chair, all pretense of royal strength abandoned. The voting was closer than I'd hoped. Almost half the assembly still views this child as a mistake. But more than half doesn't, Ethan pointed out. And opinions can change. Once the commission starts sharing findings, once people see that this pregnancy isn't causing catastrophe but creating possibility, support will grow. You're very optimistic for someone who just narrowly avoided execution. Optimism is how I cope with near-death experiences. I've had a lot of practice lately. Despite her exhaustion, Nylara smiled. Your humor will be either the saving or the destruction of diplomatic relations. Why not both? The following months brought challenges Ethan could never have anticipated. The Joint Commission was established with representatives from both species, Crescent physicians, human geneticists, cultural experts, and diplomatic specialists. They studied the pregnancy with scientific rigor while also preparing both populations for the child's arrival. Ethan's status shifted from prisoner to official diplomatic consort, a title that had to be invented since no precedent existed. He split his time between his duties as humanity's representative to the Commission and his growing role as co-parent. The bond between mother and child strengthened as the pregnancy progressed, and Nylara described feeling the child's development like music just beyond hearing. The hybrid genetics created neural patterns unlike anything in either species' records. The child was developing cognitive abilities that seemed to bridge the logical linearity of human thought with the harmonic intuition of Crescent consciousness. Ethan began experiencing effects too. Dreams that felt like they originated from elsewhere, moments where he could sense Nylara's emotional state without being near her, even occasional flashes of harmonic perception where he could almost hear the frequencies the Crescents lived within. Their relationship evolved alongside the pregnancy. What had begun as mutual crisis management deepened into genuine partnership. Late-night conversations about their respective cultures transformed into shared meals and morning discussions about the future. They learned to navigate cultural differences, to find humor in misunderstandings, to support each other through the political storms that continued to buffet them. Not all challenges were political. Some mornings, Ethan would find Nylara struggling with the physical demands of pregnancy, her Crescent biology not fully prepared for the hybrid development. Other times, she'd retreat into regal isolation, overwhelmed by the weight of expectations surrounding the child. But gradually, they found rhythms that worked, patterns of support that strengthened them both. The birth came faster than expected, hybrid vigor accelerating development. Nylara went into labor during a commission meeting, forcing Ethan to choose between diplomatic duties and personal ones. It wasn't a difficult choice. The delivery room was a marvel of combined technology, Crescent harmonic monitors alongside human medical equipment, physicians from both species collaborating in ways that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The birth itself was unlike anything recorded in either species' medical literature. Bioluminescent patterns traced across Nylara's skin, responding to the child's neural development. Harmonic frequencies filled the room, not the discordant sounds of crisis but the complex melodies of new life entering the universe. When the child finally emerged, the medical team collectively held their breath. She was perfect, tiny and new like all infants, but marked by her dual heritage in ways that were immediately visible. Her hair was silver blonde, a blend of Nylara's silver and Ethan's sandy coloring. Her skin tone split the difference between them. And her ears, slightly pointed, more prominent than human but less elongated than Crescent, marked her as something uniquely herself. "She's beautiful," Nylara breathed, holding the infant with a combination of fierce protectiveness and gentle wonder. "She's impossible," Ethan agreed, reaching out to touch one tiny hand, the fingers wrapped around his with surprising strength. "And perfect, and ours." They named her Sira, a word that meant bridge in ancient Crescent, but sounded enough like a human name to work in both languages. From her first moments, she seemed aware in ways that defied normal infant development, her eyes tracking movement, her responses suggesting understanding beyond her age. The commission members who witnessed the birth were fascinated. The data they gathered would fuel scientific papers for decades, but for Ethan and Nylara, the importance was personal. This tiny being represented everything they'd fought for, everything they'd risked, and everything they hoped for. The official presentation came 2 weeks later, held in the same great assembly hall where Nylara had fought for the pregnancy's legitimacy. Now, representatives from both Crescent territories and human colonial governments gathered together, an unprecedented mixing of both species for a shared purpose. Nylara stood on the platform, Sira cradled in her arms, with Ethan beside her. The chamber's harmonic background had shifted to something new, a melody that incorporated frequencies from both species, created specifically for this moment. "Representatives of the Crescent Empire and the Human Coalition," Nylara began, her voice carrying with practiced authority. "We present to you Sira, daughter of two worlds, heir to one throne and bridge between two peoples." Sira, as if understanding the moment's significance, opened her mismatched eyes and looked out at the assembly. One eye amber like her mother's, one brown like her father's, both ancient with intelligence that seemed far beyond her weeks of age. "This child represents not the end of tradition but its evolution," Nylara continued. "Not the weakening of our species but its strengthening through connection, not the loss of identity but the expansion of it." Ethan spoke next, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Humans and Crescents have spent decades building diplomatic relations, trade agreements, and peaceful coexistence. But we've kept our distance, maintained our separateness, afraid that too much closeness might compromise who we are. Sira proves that closeness doesn't mean compromise. She carries the best of both our peoples, Crescent harmonic intuition and human adaptive resilience, royal determination and common compassion, your ancient wisdom and our innovative spirit." He looked at his daughter, at her mother, at the assembled representatives of two civilizations whose futures now intertwined through one small life. "We don't know exactly what she'll become," he admitted. "She's the first of her kind, charting a path no one has walked before. But we know she'll have the support of both her peoples, the guidance of both her cultures, and the love of both her parents. And maybe, just maybe, she'll show us that the bridges we've been so carefully building between our worlds were always meant to be built from the inside out." The response was mixed, as they'd expected. Some representatives celebrated openly, seeing in Sira the hope for deeper alliance. Others remained skeptical, worried about the implications for their respective species. A few were openly hostile, viewing the hybrid child as a threat to be contained. But most, the crucial majority, looked at the infant with cautious optimism. They saw in her not the contamination they'd feared but the possibility they'd hoped for. After the ceremony, Ethan and Nalara stood on the balcony of her chambers, watching the sun set over the living metal city. Sira slept in a specialized crib that monitored both her Crescent harmonic patterns and her human vital signs. "It won't be easy," Nalara said softly, raising her between two worlds. "There will be those who never accept her. And there will be those who celebrate her," Ethan countered. "And eventually, the celebrators will outnumber the skeptics. That's how change works. More human optimism. More evidence-based projection. Look at how far we've come in 6 months, from secret pregnancy and imprisonment to official recognition and interspecies celebration. Progress is messy and slow, but it happens." Nalara leaned against him and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. It felt natural now, this intimacy, in ways it wouldn't have months ago. "I'm glad it was you," she said quietly. "Glad what was me. That if I was going to accidentally conceive a hybrid child that would reshape my empire and potentially alter the course of interstellar relations, I'm glad it was with someone who could see the possibility in the chaos, who could make me laugh when I wanted to rage, who could challenge me when I wanted to retreat. That's a remarkably specific compliment. You're a remarkably specific complication." She smiled, and her ears did that flutter twitch that he'd learned meant genuine happiness. "But I'm grateful for you nonetheless. I'm grateful, too, for the queen who chose partnership over panic, who saw strength in vulnerability, who was willing to fight for an impossible future rather than accept a predictable present." They stood together as stars began appearing in the violet sky, their daughter sleeping peacefully behind them. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and challenging, but no longer frightening. Sira stirred in her sleep, making small sounds that harmonized with the background frequencies of the room. One tiny hand reached out, grasping at the air, and both parents watched with wonder. "She's dreaming," Nalara whispered. "About what, do you think?" "I don't know, but given her heritage, probably something beyond either of our imaginations." Ethan smiled at that. His daughter, theirs, dreaming dreams neither species had dreamed before. Building bridges